institutions that are advancing this agenda? And if so, what could we learn from them in terms of their success and challenges? Do governments, policies, professional bodies, industries, and the private sector has instrumental roles to play in recognizing the value of TVET in tertiary education in the 21st century? And if so, what are the latest studies, trends, and anecdotal evidence of the individual roles? Our panel of experts, and again say thank you very much for joining us, will share their insights and thoughts on this important topic. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Prayono, who is the Deputy Director for Professional Affairs and Research Manager at CMO Votek Regional Center in Brunei Darussalam. Dr. Prayono has been working in the area of education, especially in technical and vocational education and training, in short form TVET, for more than 30 years. Currently, he is the Deputy Director for Professional Affairs and Research Manager and Specialist at the Regional Center for Vocational and Technical Education and Training under the Southeast Asia Ministers of Education Organization in Brunei Darussalam. Dr. Prayono's research and publication focus on TVET and skills development, innovative teaching learning qualifications framework, occupational standards, quality assurance, ICT and digitization in education, skills development, or preparing TVET for industry requirements. So, Dr. Prayono, the time is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Winnie. Everyone, very good morning for some of you, maybe from European countries. Some very good evening, or maybe late night for those coming from maybe New Zealand or Australia. But again, it's a great pleasure. Thank you for Applied Higher Education to invite me just to share, our thought. I think it's I personally, again, this is also my passion. This is my call that anything to do with TVET, I'm ready to join in, whether it is during my leave or during my work. But again, it's my call. Just a little bit of myself. I think Winnie already mentioned. In general, thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's just where I'm working at, I think in this region, in Southeast Asia, this is very unique that we have two main regional organizations that also we are dealing with TVET as well. Of course, we know the ASEAN. Under ASEAN, there is education, youth, and sport, whereby this division is also one of the functions is to tackle how to promote TVET, how to make TVET more successful in the region. And then under CMO, the Southeast Asian Ministry of Education Organizations, we have 26 centers. And around the two of them is exactly we are focusing on TVET, while others, there's some connection, but not really focused on there. So you could see that we are very strong in promoting and how to strengthen TVET in the region. And recently in 2019, ASEAN, we have a lot of discussion and meeting, and then at the end we feel like it's important for us to establish a regional body or more kind of consortium. We call it a council, so ASEAN TVET Council. So the main role is again how to promote, how to collaborate, how to coordinate TVET initiative in the region. So I think this topic is, I'm personally very, very passionate about it, that we need to discuss, even though there are a lot of progress happening. But when it comes to the recognitions, when it comes to, you mentioned about remunerations, this is something that we will continue discussing. Still a way to go for us to reach that level. But I think you could see some of the progressions that I think hopefully in not for a very long time, we could accomplish some of those agenda already identified in the strategic plan. So under ASEAN, we have the ASEAN Education Work Plan 21-25. Under CMO, we have the CMO priority areas. So we have strategic plan until 2030. And again, we have a lot of initiative towards TVET development. So I will continue sharing a bit more details in terms of how's the image of TVET in this region up to this moment. and how is the remunerations, and how can we in a bit of addressing that, but maybe that's in the next round. But I think for this intro, again, I'm very happy to be with everyone and share our just have an open discussion in terms of how to move forward from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Parano. I have so many questions for you, so I look forward to the discussion later on. You made a fantastic introduction, sort of hooking us, well, me in. So thank you. So we're going to introduce our second speakers, Professor Dr. Maurice van Nugent, who is Chief Academic Officer at Global University Systems. He also has a second job, who is also the President of University of Europe for Applied Sciences in Germany. Maurice, you need to tell us where you're actually based later on. Professor van Nugent has held visiting and honorary appointments at universities globally in his academic field in sustainable urbanization, and has published widely on international education and university management. He's actively involved in various international organizations and hosts multiple international awards. Since the mid-90s, Professor Dr. Maurice van Nugent has served on the executive of the European Access Network, EAN, which is currently based in Belgium and is the only global organization wholly dedicated to advancing access and widening participation to higher education. Maurice, the time is yours.
Thank you so much, Winnie, and good to see you again. And I'm actually in Dubai, based in Dubai at this particular moment, because I'm also actually the president of our new campus of the University of Europe in Dubai, which will be opened formally in September, which means I'm here for a couple of days to do a lot of things. I mean, for 2 years you prepare it and it's all planned, and then actually suddenly there are only a few months left to have the first students on place. And so it's a bit stressful, and apologies for being a little bit late as well, to rush around between the different places. I'm not even going to start about traffic in Dubai. Great to see you all again. Winnie, I missed your introduction, so I don't know how long you want me to talk for.
Maurice, we will invite speaker to about 4 to 5 minutes, and then we'll go into discussion and also take questions from the audience.
I did hear that 45 minutes, right?
4 to 5. 45 can say bye-bye now.
Good, excellent. Well, thank you very much for having me on this fireside chat. I mean, I must say it's the reason why I'm here is because when I saw the topic, I immediately said, wow, this is really ridiculous that we haven't discussed this before yet at one of our firesides, but it's so important to higher education at the moment. It's a topic which causes me sometimes some frustration and even a little bit of anger, right? So in the 19th and 20th, especially 20th century, thinking about higher education, we like everything to be really neat and well organized. Everything is locked up in its neat little different areas, in its boxes and so on. So we have a kind of a nice setup whereby we say, okay, this is vocational, technical education. That's for people who are going to do something professional. Then you have on top of that professional education, but that's more academic. And then on top of that, we start going to the top of the pyramid, which of course is research-led education. And that is such a completely outdated way of looking at education. First of all, the vertical thinking is a fundamental error. If there wouldn't be vocational education, if nobody would be actually embracing vocations, there would be no society. So how can we claim that research-led universities are more important than professional education or vocation? We're all totally dependent on each other. And pretending that there is actually some kind of hierarchy here is a very old-fashioned way of thinking. And I always feel, you know, I'm a produce of the research-led universities. I am an academic. I come from that system. So I'm not criticizing. I'm not criticizing that at all. All I criticize is the fact that we seem to think it's vertical, whilst in fact it's horizontal. It's a spectrum. So sometimes the emphasis is a bit more on the practical aspect, sometimes a bit more on the conceptual theoretical aspect. But ultimately, we all are just as important, because if one part of that is missing, our society just simply does not function anymore properly, and we lose a lot of our prosperity. So that is a fundamental flaw, and it's good that being addressed, because the other thing which is equally flawed is to say, okay, even if you look at it as a spectrum, it is not that this is where the vocational is and that is where the research-led is, and then the professional education in the middle, because actually proper education in the 21st century is much more fluid. It is much more a mixture of, in the academic education, you need to bring vocational elements. If you do not bring vocational elements also in the more academic forms of education, your students are not very well prepared for functioning successfully in the labor market afterwards. At the same time, if you just treat vocational as something which is, well, that is it, it becomes like almost like a dead-end road. You can only go into a vocational position. And that is not helpful either. It is very important. Also, people who actually opt out of the education and say, okay, this is what I'm ready for my job, and this is, I'm not actually interested in progressing to a bachelor's or master's or whatever. It's still important that they actually appreciate some of the aspects of the more academic forms of thinking, the critical thinking, the analytical thinking, and so on. They will benefit from that as well. Moreover, if you don't do that, you make vocational education only interesting for people who already know they're going to have vocational endpoint. Whilst I'm a great believer that actually you should allow students to opt out at various points in their education, and whether that is at diploma level, or whether that is at bachelor level, or at master level, or PhD level, or whatever level, actually should be up to the student. If you don't do that, you pre-select your students and you put them on a certain track, and they cannot escape that track anymore. All this, I feel, is a fundamental flaw in our education. And I have hands-on addressed that. I got good examples. I mean, when I was still at the University of Westminster in London, I was chair of the University of Westminster consortium, which was also at the associate further education colleges. And we designed programs in such a way that there would always be the option of a smooth transition from further education to higher education. If you don't do that, and students are able to progress from further education to higher education, but without actually the proper background, you set them up for failure. And that is actually not very helpful for the students. It's actually a waste to do that. You can say, great, we give access, but actually you don't give access because you really do not set up the system in a central way. So designing programs in such a way that the students can, if they want to progress, but if they don't want to progress, that's fine as well. And they go onto the job market at a chosen point. And I think that is how education should work. Much more thinking from the student perspective, much more also thinking from what society is nowadays. It is a society which expects students to be able to use their brains, not just execute. The old-fashioned vocational positions, I think, are rapidly, not maybe disappearing, but expecting more upgraded graduates. But at the same time, purely an academic bachelor degree or master degree will not actually be enough to be successful in your career. You also need those vocational skills and so on. So it's much more intertwined than our 20th century neat boxes suggest it is. That in really is my short 45-minute introduction to the theme.
That's a wonderful 45 minutes. Thank you very much, Maurice. Loads of questions for you, because you talk about progression as if, you have the room to do that, and it's wonderful. So we'll come and tackle progression later on. Thank you, Maurice. And last but not least, our third speaker and a final one, Mr. Dari Milani, Vice Chancellor at La Trobe University in Australia. Mr. Milani is an international education specialist with a wealth of experience and knowledge spanning over 17 years. As a leader in international education, Dari has developed expertise in designing and implementing growth strategies for public and private institutions alike, helping them to identify optimization opportunities and achieve outstanding results. Dari has led innovative transnational education strategies, co-creating a new model for university to fulfill core mission of access to education on a global scale. His work has been recognized with numerous industry awards, including for the establishment of student leadership programs and donor-funded scholarships that have had a transformative impact on individuals' development and community engagement. Dari, please.
Thank you, Rini, for that very generous introduction. And, you know, it's really, like my colleagues on this panel, the subject matter was so compelling that I was delighted to be part of this panel and have the opportunity to really discuss this with, you know, industry professionals, with people online. I think it's going to be a really exciting topic to discuss this evening. And I'm already excited hearing the views of my good colleagues on the panel, and I think we'll get to a really stimulating discussion. So, look, although I'm from London originally and educated in the UK, I live in Australia, and all of my career in education has been in Australia. So many of my observations and ideas on this topic are shaped from professional experiences within Australia, but also those lived experiences as a young person in the UK making tertiary education decisions. But really what I'd like to do in this allocated time is just give you a little snapshot of vocational education in Australia. So the very first thing I'd like to ask is for you to indulge me as I change and reframe the topic statement ever so slightly to fit the Australia context. And I would say it's time to recognize once more the value of TVET in tertiary education in the 21st century. Now, Australia has really always recognized the importance of a healthy vocational education sector, the value of that education that has a clear and direct employment outcome is something that really hasn't changed. So in Australia, a career as a tradie, which is a tradesperson, you know, like a plumber, like a carpenter, this is something that's highly valued in Australia, both, you know, in terms of remuneration opportunities, but also lifestyle opportunities. It fits with the Australian lifestyle ethos, really. So it's not something that's been looked down upon in any way or perceived as lesser. But I think what has changed over time is the way students engage in vocational education. So my father-in-law, who was a fitter and turner by trade, he did an apprenticeship in industry, and the vocational training that he undertook was really a way of credentializing those skills that he was learning in the workplace. In fact, he was, I think, doing his apprenticeship at Bosch, you know, a huge company where, you know, the range of skills that he was learning really formed his career path. So it was a way to kind of get your ticket. You learn the skills in the workplace, then you get your ticket to credentialize it. Then more recently in Australia, vocational education became more of a prerequisite that school leavers engage in before commencing a job or trade. So for example, if you want to work in you know, commercial cookery, you need to have certain qualifications before you go into the kitchen. And then even more recently, we see vocational education starting to be embedded in schools. But the demand for vocational education is connected to the industries that thrive at any given time. So in Australia, we saw in 2017 the demise of the car industry. We saw Ford and Holden, you know, General Motors leave Australia. And for many people, that was really symbolic as the end of manufacturing in Australia and the end of that vocational apprenticeship experience that my father-in-law experienced, right? Where the company teaches you the skills and then you credentialize. You know, we all really believe that the jobs of the future look very different, and STEM education is where our young people should be focusing on for those job opportunities. But of course, COVID happened, right? And the world's supply chains ground to a halt. And like many countries around the world, Australia is starting to remember the value in manufacturing around things, and having a healthy vocational education sector, training sector, is really critical to that manufacturing. But it's not just manufacturing, of course, services as well. So when we closed the borders in Australia, industries that relied so heavily on temporary workers suddenly had no staff. The hospitality sector was decimated. So what we saw then in Australia was state governments responding very proactively by subsidizing vocational education. So get more Australians trained, skilled, certified to fill those jobs. And a lot of that education was actually free. And then a year ago, Australia elected a new government, a Labor government. And of course, Labor is the Workers' Party, so we naturally expected further investment in vocational education, which was actually one of its election promises. But one thing we weren't really expecting was how the rebuilding of, perhaps I'd call it a broken relationship between government and universities would intersect into vocational education. So this relationship rebuild or reset is called the Australian Universities Accord. Now, it's an opportunity for the government and for higher education to co-create a plan or a vision with key priorities embedded within it. Now, one of the government's key priorities is something very interesting and is really an absolute corroboration of this topic statement, which is for universities to find more effective ways to collaborate with vocational education providers and recognize the value of education, of vocational training. So the question, as a university professional, as all university professionals in Australia are facing, is how do we do that? The government has recognized that there is a lot of value in technical and vocational education, but now universities need to do the same. And I think that's really going to be the subject of conversation in Australia over the coming years as we build out this Universities Accord. And I think it's a really good topic to touch upon today as well. And that's my 5 minutes, Winnie.
Thank you, Dari. Fascinating is a space definitely to watch, which is very timely, isn't it? So before I ask any questions and then I invite participants, I'm just wondering about fellow speakers, if you have questions for each other first.
If I may, Winnie, I have a question for my dear Australian colleague from La Trobe, Larry, if you don't mind. Just first of all, really good to hear about your father and Bosch. I was actually at Bosch this morning here in Dubai, and they are very generously supporting the UE campus in Dubai. So they are still doing very good work, not just when they did with your father, but even now with the new generations. And I must say, in general, German companies have always been very, very much aware of the importance of apprenticeships, the dual education, work-based education, and so on. And so we're talking here, I say this because we're talking here about the educational side, but actually there's also the employer side. And it's very important that education and employers are fully aligned on this. And I think that's the point you also made a moment ago. My concrete question is, now I've not been working in Australia, unlike Winnie, I think you were there more recently than me, but my experience in Australia was when I was acting previously at VUT in Melbourne in 1998 under Jarlath Romain, which is probably by now a name nobody remembers anymore, but in those days he was kind of, let's say, famous or infamous, depending with whom you wanted to talk. And VUT had, I think, 45,000 students, and half of those were actually on vocational programs, and half of the FET, as I think it was called, and the other half were on higher ed, a little bit less than half on higher ed, and it was a completely integrated university, and the thinking was very much about also giving, therefore, students more opportunity to go from FET into higher ed and borrow each other's courses and so on. Is that still a feature of some of the universities in Australia, or has that kind of withered away and was an experiment which didn't work very well?
No, I don't think it's something that's dissipated completely. It's interesting actually that Victoria is really the leader in that dual sector university education, and those universities are universities like Swinburne, Victoria University, as you say, RMIT. These are universities that I suppose were formed really to educate both vocational learners, but also higher education learners. That was really in the ethos of why they were created. So they've still endured. We don't see it so much in other states. It's pretty rare in Queensland. It's pretty rare in New South Wales, but it's certainly something that's very valuable. What we've probably seen more in Australia, perhaps more than other countries, is the proliferation of private vocational providers. There are so many private providers in Australia, and the quality really, it ranges from really outstanding government providers like TAFE, but also private providers right at the high level to not so good providers. So I think we still have a lot of institutions who are engaged in vocational training and looking to serve the demand that's there, but we probably have some work to do around the quality.
Yeah. So thank you. If you allow me to quickly follow up, and then I shut up. But yeah, you're right. By the way, it's TAFE. It's that was the word I was looking for, and that's the vocational arm. But so your university doesn't embrace the TAFE sector so much as VUT and Swinburne and some others have been doing. Is that something you feel? Is that a conscious choice? Is that something you regret? Is that because what you said about the private sector? Of course, typically the private sector becomes active when there is a gap, when a vacuum, right? They are not necessarily there to compete. They are there actually to fill up which seems to be not happening in the sector. There is a demand for it, and so they see the opportunity to step into it, which is great. But that also suggests that there is something missing in, and maybe the model of UT and so on has stayed too much with a limited number of institutions, and that is maybe a missed opportunity. I'm just challenge you a little bit on this one, but.
Yeah, look, I think so. I think but I would come back to the mission of why that university was created in the first place. And I think the mission of La Trobe University and perhaps some other universities was really heavily engaged in. So for La Trobe, it was access in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, giving people access to higher education. That was the mission. That was the gap that existed right there. Whereas some of the other universities like Swinburne, like Victoria University, had a mission really rooted in getting people into technical education. And then higher education kind of came after that, and it evolved in that direction. So yeah, while there's not many dual sector providers in universities in Australia, the universities accord and the language that's coming from this new Labor government is universities need to really understand vocational education. They need to do more to create a seamless transition from vocational training into higher education. And the government's not going to keep funding these two separate sectors. It actually wants to fund collaboration between these two sectors.
Right. So my question, first of all, is if we could sort of look at recognition and prestige together in TVET. And Dr. Payano, if you don't mind me asking, in Asia, as you know, how do you encourage people to look at vocational education? I think it applies in other regions too, and in the UK we see that all the time.
Yeah.
But in Asia, within the ASEANs, you know, different jurisdictions, different cultures, different sort of social structures. How do you see the work that you are working on and driving, as you said earlier, to make TVET more successful, but to make it more recognizable, to make it more prestigious? And that I'll come back to later on the question of pay parity and differential, which I think that is an important one to address, because I've been following the pay differential for quite a long time. And you look at Euromonitors, they give really good data. And I still remember, I can't remember the last time I looked at it, but I'll come back to that later. But if we could first invite Dr. Payano to look at, to tell us a bit more about where the work that you do in driving recognition, prestige, and then perhaps, you know, Darian and Morris, if you could sort of help us out to understand where you are and how things are moving in that direction.
Yeah, thank you, Winnie. I think the issue that we always facing when we talk about TVET, I agree with Professor Morris and also our colleague from Latrobe regarding how, in a way, that we can promote TVET by vocationalizing higher education, not only tertiary, but higher education. Easy to say, but not really as easy to do, you know, because in reality, in every country, they have definition when it comes to TVET. Many countries in this region still limit that TVET is only level 5 of the qualification framework. So 5 below, which is 5 is diploma, and then degree and up, that one does not belong to TVET. So I personally do not like this kind of dichotomizations or this kind of segregations, because again, the more modern the technology, the more complex the economy that we are facing, it's very hard for us to distinguish or to have this kind of a limit or kind of, you know, you only reach a certain level and then you stop, and you that one is not vocational. Just in this region, just to give you an illustration, I think Indonesia is quite advanced in terms of looking at this. So instead of looking TVET from level 1 to level 5, from Indonesia for the qualification, the national qualification framework, we have 1 to 9. I think Australia, you have 1 to 10, right? So in Indonesia, for academic track, those who are more on the, you know, knowledge and more on the improving science, that's also, they have their own space from level 1 to level 9. But in vocational, we call it the professional track. We have also the same level from 1 to 9. This is the one I like, and I would like again to promote this, because this is the way to go. In the future, with the high tech, it's very difficult for us, and it won't work if TVET only reaching a certain level. But if we stuck there, then this is what happened. You know, when we talk about TVET, always blue-collar worker, talking about only those low level, those who are not academically inclined. But now it's very difficult for us to separate the mind and the body when it comes to works. All integrated, all intermingled. That is, you know, separating it is just have no sense. So I think that is, you know, first thing that we need to discuss in this region is that promoting TVET for higher education, so that at the end, TVET is not stopped, does not stop at level 5, but can continue as long as, again, the focus is for employment, for preparing the individual for entering workforce. Then that, you know, is supposed to be the emphasis. So that is on the side of the prestige. And I think if we just stuck on that low level, then we will stuck there forever, that we will be branded as the blue collar and for those who are academically inclined, not inclined. So let's move on to the remuneration. Actually, remuneration is also just the effect of that, you know. I think, you know, the this being promoted by a professor from the US about low scales, low wage, high scale, high wage. So again, if we stop at that level 5, for example, then of course you can get the salary for high. That will affect as well on the recognitions. Because later on we talk about certifications and then the recognition. Certifications, this is also key that we need to promote, because when we look at TVET at the lower level, the community, the society, the employers, sometimes they prefer to hire someone without certification because they can pay cheaper than those with certifications. So I think this is one way. Later on, we need to address in terms of how can we create certification that can be recognized, and also create that at the end awareness that society as well as employers willing to pay more. So we're promoting from blue-collar worker to become gold-collar worker. This is, again, I keep saying this because, you know, we're preparing with the high cost when training, you know, TVET students. So I think this is one thing that we need to consider. And then the recognitions here. The funny thing including in Indonesia, if level 1 to level 4, in terms of accreditation, we use different mechanism, we use different standards that is more relevant to TVET. But once they move to level 5 and higher, they follow different standard more in the academic higher education standards. So for those who are performing well in TVET, maybe they don't get the high accreditation because of the criteria being used is not suitable for them. Because, for example, like looking into the publications, you know, looking into research, but not, for example, like collaborating with industry, how many employed graduate, how many patents being produced. So I think it's kind of different set. And if we can also consider in terms of recognitions through that type of accreditation that is more suitable to TVET, I think that's also in the future can bring us into a better or bright future for TVET. That's you know, just from my kind of contemplation and also a discussion within my colleagues. So, thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask one follow-up question then? In the region, given that there are so many countries, could you shine a light in one that is actually leading the way? I know we like to be sort of equal and equal recognition. Yeah. Is there one that actually is sort of doing a bit more and advancing this agenda?
Malaysia, for example, actually they're trying to go to that direction as well, but it seems like stuck at the level 6. So they can go from the TVET level 5, they can be matriculated, at the end they can go to level 6, and then after that, so 7 and 8 then becomes more academic. So this is, again, I think we still need to continue sharing this so that at the end others, this hopefully become contagious, you know. Vocationalizing higher education is, again, something that we need to continue promoting. Others, actually, some others also thinking, but the other issue is about naming. You know? So when we talk about TVET, people always associated with that level 5 and below. But when you talk about applied education, they can consider, oh, I think mine can be considered that, even though for master and PhD, because it's more applied. So also about the term being used, also something that we can also maybe consider or try to have some kind of synonymous term being used so that at the end still basically similar meaning.
Morris, would you like to sort of address this from where you are?
Always, Winnie, always. So two points. One, you asked about the branding. Of course, in a unified system, as we briefly discussed with institutions like RMIT and so on, in some ways that branding is addressed in a quite effective way. But also what I did in London, you know, several decades ago with the Westminster Group, that was not a unified system. All the further education colleges were independent, but they were still associated with the University of Westminster. And by creating this Westminster Group, you address some of the image problems that somehow a vocational institution is not the same as a university. You can still go to university, but you go on to the vocational route in that university, and then later you might transfer. The second point, which is, I think, quite crucial here, is that in our old 20th century and before thinking, education is very much something you do when you are 16 to 23, right? And if you haven't done it, oh, now you got a problem. Try to make up later on in life is going to be a real struggle, because our system and our funding of our system is set up really in that old-fashioned thing. You need to know what you want to do when you're 16, whether you're smart enough to get a bachelor's, whether you really want to get a bachelor's, or you really want to get a master's, what is your career, what is going to be your job, and that's it. But we all know that this thinking about jobs for life and so on is really not that appropriate anymore. So education, we also need to rethink ourselves as something which is part of life. It's part of our knowledge economy, and it's part of life, and therefore it's part of what universities should be in society and how they should be funded. Some governments are definitely moving in that direction very slowly. But as always, when it comes to transformation in society, you need to have the triple helix, don't you, Winnie? You need to have the three parties working together. You need to have the employers there who actually understand the importance of being engaged in that knowledge economy, supporting people to progress when they are ready for it, or maybe move into another sector, right? Employers need to embrace that as well. And I know some good employers embrace that, and some other employers are just not ready for that yet, but it's crucial. The employers are just as important in this story as the academia, as of course, as quite rightly pointed out, the politicians and the civil service and the regulators and so on, right? So you need to get this triple helix of the public sector, the political sector on one side, the employers and the universities all being willing to move in the same direction and saying, hey guys, society has changed. Education isn't so much about, a very small young age group and then give them a piece of paper because they know everything they need to know for the rest of their life. It is a very silly way of looking at it. So the just-in-time education, which I'm a big fan of, gives much more flexibility, but is also much more suitable for a knowledge economy. You go back to whether it's a college or whether it's a university when you are ready for that. Now, for some people, that is very early on in their life. For other people, that's later in their life. Some people want to actually get started quite soon and then go back when they feel there's a need for another qualification or another set of knowledge, but also if they feel they're reaching a ceiling and they need another certification in order to break through that ceiling. And that's a completely different way of looking at education. But if you are willing to embrace it in those terms, actually the distinction between whether you go the academic route or whether you first go into the vocational route and then later you might go into a more academic route, actually that discussion becomes suddenly much less relevant. The discussion about remuneration becomes less relevant because actually you can invest in education at any point in your life, right? But it requires a quite radical, different way of thinking about education from all parties concerned, not just academia, but also from employers and also from the public sector and politicians. The big payoff of this is, of course, in my view, it's absolutely essential for the, sorry about that, forgot to switch off my telephone. It's absolutely essential for the development of the knowledge economy, right? The way we have been approaching education up till now is actually becoming a real hindrance for some of the national economies to take off and go to the next stage. So it's a very timely message. Guys, we really radically need to rethink the way we not only offer the vocational education, but also the more academic education.
Thank you. Gary, would you like to say anything before we open up to the audience?
Yeah, look, I found that discussion really interesting, and it's so great to hear these different perspectives, because I immediately go, well, how does that translate and overlay into the Australian perspective? And Dr. Payano was talking about the qualification framework and the idea that the framework 1 to 5 is seen as lesser to 6 to 9, but it's not supposed to be. It's actually different skills. And in Australia, we have the Australian qualification framework, levels 1 to 10. And that was very much the intent of that AQF. Even the way, you know, the government at the time designed that AQF. It's a circle, right? It shows that this thing goes round and round, and it should be a continuous circle. It's about different skills you learn at level 1 versus skills you learn at level 10. Not better, but different. I think where we have a perception problem is actually within universities, and universities recognizing the value of those qualifications that are not the same qualifications that are delivered at a university. But what we've seen is universities are starting to develop vocational courses, but in a different name. They might call them internships, right? But what is an internship? It's work-based learning. It's an opportunity for a student to be in a workplace and apply skills that they've studied, they've learned. So universities are starting to do this. We know that our graduates need to be more prepared for the workforce. They're not getting the full preparation they need from university. So we develop these other courses. But actually, a much smarter way to work would be to work with vocational providers and say, actually, this internship, you know, could be delivered by a vocational provider, and we build an assessment framework around that internship. So rather than just completing your internship, you've got, you know, knowledge evidence assessments. You've got various ways of measuring the efficacy of that internship. And I think that would be a much smarter way for universities to work. And I know there are some universities who are starting to think like that and starting to partner with vocational providers in that sense. And I'm confident La Trobe University will be one of those as well into the future.
It's actually wonderful to see the commitment and also the work that's going on. So thank you. We're now going to
Thank you very much for announcing this on our webinar, so that your colleagues are aware of it as well, that you just made a major policy announcement on higher education applied to higher education, right? Absolutely great.
Yeah, it's all because of Dari. We are now going to open it up to the audience, and we actually have quite lively contribution on the web. So while we're preparing our audience to raise a hand, I'm just going to read a couple of them. So George Abraham was saying today you need to be ready for continuous learning. And Rowan, wherever you're from, you can raise your hands later or join us. You said, which is more important for the employer, the technical or vocational skills acquired on or the academic achievements. And if I mispronounce your name, do pardon me, it's Mwira from Africa. It says TVET lessons there could be relevant to us too. And in Botswana, NQF and on TVET on paper, it goes up to level 10, just as academic tertiary education. So they ought to be of same parity of esteem. And we also have Omar from Malaysia saying exactly, Dr. Payono, different countries have a different meaning of TVET. So quite a lot. Finally, Abita, and you joined from Dubai, where Morris is now. The topic and discussion is very interesting and important. As a comment on vocational education, I believe employability has lately become the most important objective of any qualification, pushing institutions to add, modify, promote vocational dimensions in every program. And the divide between academic qualification and vocational education is rather blurring. As such, it is time for a holistic approach to higher education for knowledge, skills, and more importantly, competency. Absolutely agree. So I'm now going to turn to the audience. I have the power to invite you to speak. So if we have anyone who, no, actually I have the control to invite you to speak. So if anyone who have any questions or any comments that you want to make, if you could sort of raise your hands there, and I could see a hand raised. So, Omar, I'm going to let you come in to join us. You're on.
Hello, good evening, everyone. This is Muhammad Kaiser Omar from University Putra, Malaysia. Enjoy the heated discussion on the TVET practices from three different, regions and from the Australian perspective as well in Dubai. Well, I would like to ask, University Putra Malaysia is more of labeling as a research university, whereas they are components of TVET subject matters as well. So how can we sort of embed a so-called a TVET-centric program? What would be the best strategy to start out with? Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson.
Thank you. Any responses from our speakers, or shall I invite our next two participants who raised their hand?
I would don't mind having a go at this one first, Winnie. I think it's a great question, Omar. And in the examples I was giving around Australian universities, it's that very question that they're looking to answer. And a lot of universities don't really know how to answer that question. And that's why we've got to the point where government is saying, right, now you over there, higher education, and you over there, vocational education, you're going to sit in a room until you come up with a solution, right? So we're being pushed into coming up with the solution because we haven't been able to do it by ourselves. But I think a key part of it is recognizing what vocational education and training actually is. And if you recognize it, if you have a definition of it, then it's easier to say, right, we are a university who is going to do 70% of this course as higher education, and all of our knowledge outcomes, performance outcomes will be related to higher education, but 30% will be something else. 30% will be performance-based. It will be about vocational skills and training. So I think there's ways to do it, but the first step is actually recognizing what is VET within a curriculum at a higher ed uni and what is not.
Yeah, I can also maybe add a little bit on this. Yeah, in Indonesia, so this has been discussed for quite lengthily because sometimes related to the funding. If you have program related to TVET, then you can apply for funding related to that. So clear definitions need to be agreed among especially in this case, the academia in the university in terms of what you define by TVET. Of course, this is start from the curriculums, start in the teaching learning process, including partnership with industry, looking into the KPI. What do you have, when looking at the key performance indicators, are you measuring about more on the number of applications, number of research, how many funding you generate from research, or is it more in terms of providing, for example, like internship, apprenticeships, employment, collaboration with industry for getting patents? These are, kind of a bit of different emphasis, but we cannot generalize from country to country. And I think it's good if every country or even university discuss about what you define about TVET according to you. But of course, when we talk about general definition of TVET, is any education, training, skill development that prepare the students or the trainees for employment. This is the key. Employment can be self-employed or can be working for others, but there is the general directions. But within it, there's a lot of things that can be discussed. So I think that is something that among the stakeholders can agree on. So for example, like looking into the KPI, okay, I'm planning to introduce more TVET oriented program in the university. So in that case, later in terms of KPI, looking into the employment of the graduates, looking into the number of patents, looking into the industrial collaboration. What kind of collaboration with industry? Is it just visit, or is it more kind of providing equipments, or maybe a guest lecture, or even working or studying in the company? These are the ones in terms of teaching learning process also will be different between academic and vocational. But I think it's a very important question that has always come up on this area.
Yes, thanks, Vinny. I'll give three very concrete answers to the same question. One is, as you know, as you said in the introduction, I'm not only president of University of Europe, but also I'm in charge of the academic side of a global university system, which actually is something like 26 higher education institutions. And I had the pleasure only a few weeks ago to visit one of our universities in India, UPES, University for Petroleum and Energy Studies, UPES in North India. And I was quite impressed what they have done. They have made it very clear, yet 25% of all the time the students spend with us is actually focused on the professional development, on the professional skill development. And as a consequence of that, of course, they have an extremely high employment rate. So they make it clear, you need to have that balance right. 75 is dedicated to the academic skills, the knowledge side, etc. 25% purely to the vocational, professional, etc. skills students need to have in order to be successful in their careers. And I think that is, for me, for the entire group, I've set that now as an example, saying, guys, let's start looking at this, because I think it's a very powerful concept. The second point is the work integrated learning. So yes, we do internship, University of Europe as well. Actually, the students spend a full semester in work, or we have the so-called work-based programs whereby employers actually pay for the students. There are many different models there. The very important part with work integrated learning is always the work integrated, right? It's not about doing some work and see something in the outside world and come back on campus, but it's actually how do you integrate that work experience into the learning process. But equally important, and I hope that message didn't get lost, equally important as work integrated learning is learning integrated work. If employers don't embrace that, actually do not understand that whatever piece of paper you have, whether it's a diploma or a bachelor, etc., that is not the end, because in a knowledge-based economy, you need to continue to develop as an individual as well as a company. Then you miss the point, I think. So for universities to understand the importance of work integrated learning and learning integrated work, and that they should also play a major role in that learning integrated work part is for me a very powerful message. And I've been for more than 10 years chairman of the World Association for Cooperative and Work Integrated Learning, which is now based at the University of Waterloo in Canada. We, by the way, little plug, will have our major conference at the end of June, so I hope everybody will attend that one for WACE. But my message there has always been, don't just focus on co-op education, internships, etc. Also embrace that learning integrated work, just as important. Final point is access. We haven't actually mentioned that, right? But we totally undervalue the importance of vocational education in society to bring people into learning who might actually be hesitant to go into university, who might be capable of going into university, but they are hesitant to do it. And vocational education is actually a major access route into learning. And I think in many societies really undervalue that. And this is what I try to explain also why I was so passionate about the Westminster Association of University and Colleges. University of Westminster historically is a major player in access to higher education. But if I'm frank, and maybe it's a bit different now, I left the university 15 years ago, but if I'm frank with you, actually when students came to the university and they might not have all the academic attitude, etc., they were struggling. So great, you're welcome, but actually the support of the university was there, but it wasn't really that intensive as what you would get at a vocational college. At a vocational college, a further education college, really are set up to support students who might be insecure, who actually have a lot of talent, but they're not aware of it. They don't walk into the classroom and immediately make a lot of noise. They want to sit at the last row in the classroom, etc. You need to bring those in. Vocational colleges are so much better at that. Now, if you can then, through the vocational colleges and the wonderful support they offer, these students then later on into a bachelor track or even a master track and so on. This is very valuable. and it's, I think, something I'm sure Dari agrees with me, you know, that using vocational routes to unleash some of the talent in society, which actually is getting lost very often, and find a good way to do that, rather than expect universities to be able to do that, because many universities, especially the research-led university, the kind of research universities I went to, actually were really bad at it. I mean, either you are good enough and you passed, or you were not good enough and you had a problem, right? It was not the university's problem. It was the students' problem. So fair enough, it's the big universities, but we should not really undervalue the massive, really valuable work further education, vocational colleges do when it comes to access to higher education.
What
Yeah,
a conversation.
I couldn't agree
actually
more.
overran. Dari, do you want to respond?
Look, I couldn't agree more with that sentiment. I think it is a critical part of vocational education. And, you know, when you look at a lot of universities in Australia, you see that with the domestic students, there is a high dropout rate. And that tells us that actually universities are not that soft landing for students. You know, we can't expect students, you know, particularly if they're first in family, this is their first experience of higher education, they don't have a guide with them. The universities are not always very good at being that guides. We want independent learners the day they turn up, but actually vocational training is a really good springboard into higher education. And, you know, the more success a student has in education is dependent on how engaged they are. And when things are difficult, when things feel out of reach, they disengage. And, you know, I think vocational training provides that reachable goal, that incremental success, and that journey into, you know, further education. So I think it's a point I couldn't agree more with Professor Lawrence.
I'm afraid I have to wrap this up. This overran, never happened before when I moderated it, but it's such an important topic that I actually had the privilege to set. So I thought we'd have a great conversation. We have a very lively Q&A sort of coming in from various attendees. So I do have to apologize to all of you. We cannot not address you all, but I know I'd actually like you to stay on to do a meet and greet, and then you can you know, connect with the individual speakers and then take that conversation forward if our speakers, you know, are willing. So before we go, I just want to say a big thank you. I wish that we can continue to talk about it, but it's past, I think, 11 p.m. In Australia with Dari, so that's real commitment. And obviously, Maurice, you have a campus to set up and open soon, so thank you. That's really dedication. And Dr. Parao, no, I know you're in Malaysia doing loads of presentations and work, and again, thank you. So we can't quite see your big hands put together for our speakers, Dari, Maurice, and also Dr. Parao, but thank you very much. I think, Simon, the time is yours, or I'm allowed to? No, you will invite people to come in, right?
Are we?
I don't know. I think. Would you like to invite our participants to join so that you can take a photo and then they can say hello to the speakers quickly?
I'll try. All right. I'll do it now.
We won't keep you long because I know you have to go, but it'll be quite good for some of the delegates who can't, you know, ask you a question earlier to say hello.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Yeah, maybe people have to switch on the cameras as well, right?
Yeah, people need to switch on their cameras. I think Simon's working on it. Some of them are very shy, so for those who are willing.
Some enjoy Mohammed.
Okay.
Yeah, so George Abraham and also Ada both, you know, contributed actively in the Q&A. So hello, good to see you all. But perhaps we can take this, you know, sort of offline, and Apply HE obviously will help us if you want to. So again, thank you. And for those who is your bedtime, more joining in. So
thank you very much. Good conversation. Really
Thank
dynamic.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. And as always with these kind of debates, not enough time, isn't there, when we want to go on and on and on. But long live modern technology. So we all can connect via whatever, LinkedIn and all those kind of wonderful platforms which are available to us to continue the discussion. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We need to make it a conference topic.
Yes.
Yeah,
At
true. Yeah.
Upcoming conference.
Are you inviting us?
No,
I've not been to Melbourne for South Victoria to some time, actually.
Well, we'll have to work on something.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
For everybody, that's all we have.
Okay, then.
So-
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye-bye.
And on that,
Thank
we
you.
have more people joining. So
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
just give it a couple of more minutes.
Give
and then-
it a second, and we do the group photo, because I just comb my hair, so I just
Good afternoon from Botswana.
Hello.
All right.
Yang Weng from,
Yes.
where are you from, Yang Weng?
Oh, sorry, I'm from Malaysia. University Tenaga
Malaysia.
Nasional. Yeah.
Okay.
Fine.
Okay, and then Aida from CRC.
Hi everyone, I'm from UTHM, University Tun Hussein Al Malaysia. We are one of the TVET based university in Malaysia, one of 4.
Great.
Excellent.
To see you.
Yeah. I very much enjoyed, as Winnie just said, my visit to Malaysia only a few weeks ago. And yeah, it was great to be back again. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Richard
Right.
from Botswana.
So we have said a quick. Did anyone want to introduce themselves before we go?
Yes, please. Yes, please. I'm Richard from Botswana. I'm
Hello,
waiting
Richard.
for. Yes, thank you. Botswana International University of Science and Technology. One of my questions, interest in this webinar was, how do you differentiate TVET from higher education? Our tertiary education policy defines tertiary education as post-secondary education, which therefore includes TVET as well as higher education. And my other aspect of interest is to say, would we say subjects like engineering, for instance, if we talk about the skills that are applied in the work post-training, would you say that engineering is a TVET? Is TVET? I was having a chat with some of the lecturers in engineering. We can't progress much on that question. They kind of shun the phrase TVET. They think, no, it's not part of our education. We are research-based and all. And I have a question for you there, Prof. Royan. I actually put it on the notice board to say, what would be your take about, and I like your learning integrated work. We have a policy about work integrated learning. And to be very honest with you, in this particular forum, it is so superficial that pretty much a lot of the time these students are out there being sent around to send mail from office to office and not really doing tangible learning and work. Thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you, Richard. I'd respond to that one about the work integrated learning, because I do feel very passionate about that. I think there needs to be an overlay, a structured assessment of what the student is doing in that workplace. And I think that's something that TVET does very well. And it's something that higher education can really learn from TVET, particularly around that work-based learning. So I think universities need to look to the vocational sector, particularly around internships, particularly around work integrated learning, and see some of the performance evidence that is already, part of the assessments for vocational training, and see how to embed those into those work integrated learning.
Yeah, if I can say something about that, let me see if my microphone is, yeah. I will type in a moment the web address of the World Association for Cooperative and Work Integrated Learning, WACE, W-A-C-E, because actually that's where you find the knowledge. So this is a world organization, also has national organizations, including Australia, New Zealand, Canada, everywhere. And this is thousands of professionals who all work in the field of work integrated learning. And really, there are so many different forms of it. We cannot even get started at the moment on that particular topic. So I'm going to take the easy way out, and I will type the website and have a look at that, because that's where you will find a lot of information about that relationship between learning in a work-based way and learning in the classroom, and how to connect that, and how to assess also the work-based learning, right? Because that's another topic. A lot of universities say, yeah, you go and do an internship, tick the box, you've done it, fine, you're qualified to graduate, but actually you also need to assess what they're doing, right? So this is also a very important topic, but I'll finish typing that, and then I would look forward to discuss that maybe at another time, more in depth as well.
Great. I think that's come to a nice. Oh, sorry, George Abraham, you have.
Oh, thank you very much. It's great. I've been virtually on all the sessions of Applied HE, and some of the things that Professor Morris was talking about, we're connected on LinkedIn. Is there's very much a blinkered view that their thinking is very siloed, and industry as well does not think what they need. And they tend to think, oh, you've got to give us ready-made people. But with the agile and fast-moving pace of the globe, now you don't need to have a graduate degree to get into a job. It is the critical thinking and your application, which is what people are looking for. And that's where we are moving to. Anyway, enjoyed. Wonderful conversation. And, we'll be in touch.
Thank you. So as Ada and you suggested, George, we could connect on LinkedIn, and then
definitely.
I think that is the end of our conversation here. And thank you again for joining us.
Thanks.
Have a good evening and a good day.
Good day.
Thanks for sharing, Wendy. Perfect.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
That website, Prof. That website, Prof. Brian.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
I did share it, but if it didn't come through, just ask on LinkedIn and I will give it again. Yeah, there's also a LinkedIn site for it. Yeah.
All right. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.